Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me on my first episode of my podcast, The Whole You, which deals with how to live whole in a sick culture. So thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I'm actually kicking off a series that will span quite a few episodes, and it's called The Power of the Mind. So I believe that the mind is incredibly powerful. In this series, it'll span a few episodes because you can talk about the mind, you can research about the mind, and never even really scratched the surface. There's so much information out there. And so I'm going to begin today with this series. And what really started this journey for me a few years back, I came across Dr. Caroline Leaf. She's a neuroscientist. And she made this statement about thoughts that I had never really heard or understood before. And that kind of kickstarted my journey into researching the mind and really wanting to understand thoughts and where do they come from and how do you manage them, because as a Christian, I have lived all my life, we hear these Bible verses, take every thought captive, and we hear these things, but I've always, like, in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, well, how do I do that? How do I take a thought captive? What does that actually look like? How do I practically do that? And so this is what this podcast is going to be. I want to really address these things, and I want to bring some practical ways on how you can do it and implement it into your day-to-day life, and so that you can truly live the healthiest version of you that God intended for your life. And so the statement that Dr. Caroline Leaf made, she said that your thoughts are not abstract, meaning they're not just floating around in the sky. The picture that comes to me is whenever in school, whenever you would draw little stick figures and you would do the little cloud coming from their, when they're talking, you put the little cloud or your thoughts, it would just be like a little cloud and it would have your thoughts in it. And for me, for a long time, I know it sounds funny, but that's kind of how I pictured thoughts. They were just, things floating around, words just floating around inside my head. And Dr. Caroline Leaf, she said, your thoughts are not abstract. They are actually real physical things, and they take up real estate in your brain. And I thought that was an intriguing thing. And I began to really dive in and research what that meant and what that meant for me personally. Because if my thoughts are not abstract, if they're not just, floating around up there, they have a root. They're connected to something. It's a tree. It's a real thing growing on the inside of your mind. And so I began to look at mind management completely different from that point, because I said to myself, my thoughts are real, and they're creating a real structure on the inside of my brain. And I know for me as a person and as a mom, I want to be able to equip my children with tools on how to manage your thoughts, because they're real. They are real, and they have real implications on your emotions, on your physical body, on how you think about things, and the perspective, the lens through which you see life. It all begins in your mind. So I wanted to talk about that today, and we're going to look at some healthy habits we can do to really hone in on the mind and work through some of those things. But one thing I wanted to talk about today, and I wanted to start with this because there's a lot going on in our world right now. And so the topic I really wanted to start with today with the mind is stress. We have stress. Everyone has stress. Everyone has stressors, things that stress or add to stress in our lives. And especially, with the world events going on right now with Ukraine and Russia and the war and rumors of war with Taiwan and China. And there's all of these external stresses. And then there's all the personal stresses in your life. Maybe you're dealing with raising children, or marital issues, or financial strain, and unstable stock markets, and losing jobs, and market crashes, and all of those things are so real. And I believe that stress is a natural part of life. You can't avoid stress. There's going to be stress in life, but there's also this magnified stress, right? So there's all these things happening around our world, and there's so many things. There's inflation, right? And so I asked myself a question. I wrote down this question as I was just planning for today, and I said, where does stress begin? Where does stress begin and where does stress end? Because if I believe that everything is interconnected, so my thoughts, Dr. Caroline Leaf says it all the time, you think, feel, choose in that order. So you think and then you choose based off what you think, and then you feel based off what you choose and what you think. So think, feel, choose. And it's a cycle that happens continually throughout your day. You think, feel, choose, think, feel, choose. And so with all of the stress happening in our world, I wanted to start with this because I wanted to help us look at it from a perspective of faith and also science, and how we can manage stress, because stress is never going to go away, and how we can do implement healthy tools into our lives to manage the stress. So that's the question we're going to address today. Where does stress begin and where does stress end, and what can we do about it? So I read this research study put out by Dr. Carrie Jones and Rupa Health. They're fantastic to follow if you are on social media. And Dr. Carrie Jones, she said this. She said, stress can be imagined. If you always anticipate the worst, you will continue to trigger your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, causing your amygdala to behave like the stress you're imagining is actually happening. And when I read that a couple times, and it blew my mind. So your mind is so powerful that you can actually imagine stress, and then you consequently feel it in your body without the actual stress you're imagining really happening in your reality. So I thought about that with just all the stress we have in our world, and then we have imagined stress. So we stress about things happening in our life, and then that's really happening, and then we stress about things that are imagined stress that hasn't even happened yet. That's not even a real part of our reality. And so we are thinking, feeling, choosing, right? So we're imagining stress, and our body is reacting to this stress that's not even physically present. And I thought that was so incredible. That is the power of your mind. And that's why it's so important to manage it. It's so important to control your mind, because you are physically causing a reaction in your body over something that hasn't even happened. That's what your mind has the power to do. And so, I just thought about sickness in our society. No wonder our society is so sick right now, right? We have a society that is sick mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. So we're going to look at how stress affects these 4 areas and how we can manage it. So let's start with physically. How does stress affect us physically? This is from Dr. Brandy Zachary. She's a functional medicine doctor with Rupa Health. She says, when you think of something stressful, your cortisol rises. And if cortisol rises, your secretory immunoglobulin A goes down. And when your SIGA goes down, you become more prone to infection. This is how stressful, worried thoughts can make you physically ill. So that imagined stress that we talked about, it actually causes cortisol to rise in your body. If you research what cortisol is, it's the main stress hormone in your body. So when you deal with stress, your body actually releases more cortisone to get you through it. You might have heard of the fight or flight response. That's cortisol in the body. Okay, so whenever you continue to dwell or worry about these stressful thoughts, things that may not even be happening, you're releasing excessive cortisol throughout your body, which causes physical, emotional, and mental sickness. So some natural things. So you may say, well, how do I lower cortisol? Here's what you do. Movement. I don't love strenuous exercise. It's not my favorite. Exercise is not my favorite, just to be honest. But especially strenuous exercise, HIIT workouts. My sister, she is a fitness fanatic. She is all into that, and she tries to get me to do it all the time, but it's just not my thing. So I don't love strenuous exercise. So what do I do to lower cortisol? Every morning I do a 2-hour walk with my kids. We walk up to the lake, we walk around wherever we want to go. And in the evening, my family and I try and do a 1-hour walk, or we get outside and let them play, or whatever it is. So it's just learning how to move your body. We have a very stalled society right now, especially with the rise of technology, using social media, which are great tools. I'm not against those things at all, but but it causes us to really focus on those things, right? You're usually sitting, you're scrolling for hours, so you're sitting for prolonged periods of time, and so you have this excessive cortisol in your body, and you're not getting it out, you're not moving. So movement is the key. And sunlight, diet, we'll get into all of those things later. So those are all some things that you can do physically. Next, mentally. How does stress affect us mentally? Well, whenever you live in a constant state of worry or stress, you are creating the right environment in your body for anxiety and depression to come alive. And that's just the truth. Think about it. If I'm constantly imagining stress, if I'm constantly bracing for the worst, if I'm constantly expecting the bad, I'm creating the perfect environment for anxiety to thrive. And I came across this research, and it was incredibly interesting. And I'll put the links to all of these things so you can go back and you can research it for yourself. But I researched how many people in the United States are currently taking psychiatric drugs. And when it comes to anti-anxiety medication, there are 31,229,150 people that is recorded currently on medication for anxiety. Okay, so just to give you a rough estimate here, there are roughly 332,525,830 people in all of the United States. So when you do the math, that breaks down to about 1 out of 10 people in the United States, ranging from ages 0 to 100, are currently on anti-anxiety medication. I also found it really disheartening. I saw the ages 0 to 5, the number was really high for anti-anxiety medication. They broke it down by age group. So you have all ages, but even 0 to 5-year-olds are on anti-anxiety medication in the United States. Let's look at depression. Depression was even worse. There are roughly 45,204,771 people on depression medication. So the age group that had the highest percentage of usage was between the ages of 25 and 44. So that's most people in that age are starting new jobs, they're starting new careers, they're having families of their own, raising children, traveling, doing all those things. And that's how many people are struggling and are on depression medication. So that breaks down to about 1 out of 7 people in the United States are on medication for depression. And those are just mind-blowing numbers to me, because I look at that and I'm like, what are we doing to help these people realize that you can take a pill? And I'm not against medication at all, but you can take those medicines and you can do all those things, but it begins in your mind. It begins in your thought life. I think Desmond Tutu said it. He said, at some point we have to stop pulling people out of the river and travel upstream and find out why they're falling in. Why are people falling in? Why are people falling into anxiety? Why are people falling into depression? Why are there so many of our youth, ages 0 to 5? Why is a 5-year-old on anti-anxiety medication in the United States? There's so many things that we need to begin to address before we just give a pill, before we just give a short-term solution. And I believe that starts when traveling upstream, like Desmond Tutu said. I believe that starts in the mind. We have to begin there. That's the starting place, because you think, you feel, you choose. Okay, so those numbers were staggering to me. And I love what Jordan Peterson said. He's a well-known psychologist. He says this. He says, you need to face the demands of life voluntarily. So you need to learn how to respond to a challenge instead of bracing for a catastrophe. Right? So you have to, and I think that's key with dealing with stress. I have to learn how to respond to the challenges of my day, respond to the demand, and not brace for catastrophe, not brace for the worst case scenario, which so many of us have learned to do, and it's actually become a pattern in our life. And so I thought that was brilliant what he said. And so when it comes to stress in the mind, I believe it starts with reframing the perspective you've adopted as truth, right? The most powerful thing you can do is question your thought life. So whenever you have a thought, whenever you begin to become stressed out and you feel those levels of cortisol rising and there's those excessive amounts are rushing through your body and you begin to feel it, you begin to feel physically sick, you need to learn how to step back and question what you're thinking. Say, is this really true? Is what I'm thinking about this situation right? Am I looking through a correct lens? Is my perspective, is it correct, or does it need to be shifted? And I think that's powerful. I think that we have to understand that we have responsibility to do that. I don't need to just take every thought that comes in my mind at face value. It doesn't mean it's true. There's thoughts that come into my mind that are not true at all. They're not based in any type of truth. And so we have to learn how to question those thoughts, reframe our perspective on what on the stress that may be actually happening and on stress that maybe isn't really even a part of our reality, that we're just imagining. Okay. So let's look at the next area, how stress affects our emotions. Dr. Caroline Leaf says this all the time. Your emotions are not random. They are actually made by you. They're made by you. Emotions do not happen to you. They're made by you. So it goes back to that. I think, I feel, I choose. I feel because I think. So whenever you have an emotion, whenever you're feeling stressed out, whenever you have anxiety, whenever you have depression, whenever you have these rage or anger or any of those things, you have to look at the emotion and say, okay, well, I think, feel, choose. So if there's an emotion that I'm experiencing right now, I have to go back to the thought, because the thought produced the emotion, not the other way around. I don't feel because I don't feel and then think. I think, therefore I feel. Right? So emotions are not random, and we have to learn to question those thoughts and adjust the perspective and change the emotion. Okay? And I don't think that emotions are bad things. We often think, well, sadness is bad and anger is bad and happiness is good, and but that's not true, right? Emotions are just emotions. I believe they're God's gift to us. Emotions are just signals that something is happening on the inside of us that needs attention. That's all it is. So we don't need to label emotions as good or bad. Happiness is good, anger is bad. No, those are just signals. They're just allowing you a look on the inside that says, hey, something needs to be addressed. Okay? So here's the truth. My emotions will continue to remain out of control if my thought life remains out of control. I'm not going to get better emotionally until I deal with the root, until I deal with the thought that's happening. That's why I go back to medication. We are quick to, in the pharmaceutical industry in America, we're quick to pop a pill. We're quick to give a pill. But we're not helping the people really long term, because we're not dealing with the root. We're just covering the symptom, but we're not dealing with the actual problem that's happening. So I believe we need to start there. Okay. Remember, everything is interconnected. Okay. So I may not be responsible for the cause of the emotion, meaning it might have been in response to what someone did or what someone said, or an uncontrollable circumstance. We all have those in life, right? However, I'm still 100% responsible for the management of it. I am never not responsible for controlling my mind, and I'm never not responsible for the emotions that are created out of my thought life. I'm responsible. I know we tend to shy away from responsibility. We don't like that word in America. We tend to place blame on everyone else. But the thing is, if I'm continually placing blame on someone else, then I really don't have the power that I think I do. And that's something that I want to shift in perspective for everyone watching. You are powerful. God has given you the tools on the inside of you to deal with these things, but you're not going to get there by constantly placing blame on someone else for the trajectory of your life, for the reality of your life. At some point, we have to stop and say, no, if I really am powerful, if I really do believe that about myself, then a powerful person takes responsibility and they look inward. They do an introspective inward look at themselves and say, okay, what do I need to take responsibility for? I don't take responsibility for what someone did to me, but I do have to manage the result of it. I do have to manage the emotion. I have to manage the thoughts. I have to choose to forgive. I have to do all of those things, because the result of it, what happens in my body, the physical response that will happen ultimately, is not worth it. And it's not the health that God has called each of us to live in. Okay. So lastly, I want to look at stress from a biblical perspective. Okay. And how do we deal with it from a biblical perspective? So in John chapter 14, Jesus says this. He says, I'm leaving you well and whole. That's my parting gift to you. It's peace. I don't leave you the way you're used to being left, feeling abandoned and bereft. So don't be upset and don't be distraught. I love that he says that I'm leaving you well and whole. That's the theme of this podcast, right? Whole health. I believe that was always the design. The original design of God for our lives, for your life, is whole health. And so in the Bible, the word for peace, he says I'm leaving you with peace. Some people think, well, how can I have stress in my life and peace at the same time? Well, let me show you. In the Bible, the word for peace, it never means simply the absence of trouble. It means everything which makes for our highest good. So peace is everything which makes for your highest good. And the peace which this world offers us is escape or avoidance of trouble, right? That's why we mindlessly scroll on Instagram for so long. That's why a lot of young people and even adults, that's why they struggle with pornography. That's why we watch television for endless hours. That's why there's eating disorders. That's why there's all of these things, because ultimately it's a form of escape. We're trying to escape a reality that we're not comfortable being in. And stress will make you do that. Stress is one of those things. And so if you're living constantly in stress, you're going to start finding ways to try to escape the stress, right? And so we see that in people all the time. They live stressed out, 12 months out of the year, and then they get a 2-week vacation. And, that's how they manage their stress, the 2-week vacation. That's not how God called us to live. He has given us the tools to manage it, right? So he says, I leave you peace, and peace has nothing to do with the absence of trouble. Okay. So how do I operate in peace while dealing with the stress of this world? How I think of the Ukrainians right now, the church in Ukraine. I think about them. I think about, I've seen just heartbreaking images of moms holding their babies and dads going off to fight in the war, and they're sending their wives and their children off. I've seen those images, and it's heartbreaking. And there's real stress happening in our life, right? It may not be on that scheme. We're not feeling that personally right now, but there's a lot of stress happening. And so how do I live in a world that is full of chaos? How do I live in a world that is full of horrible things happening, like war? How do I live in this reality, but still operate in the peace that Jesus has promised, that Jesus said he left for me? Okay. So I believe that it begins with trust, right? Peace means that everything is going to work for my highest good. He's working it out for my highest good, the purest good, right? We sometimes have a skewed version of good. We look through a lens that we believe is good, but we often disappoint ourselves, right? But I believe it starts with trust. So when I'm dealing with stress, but I know that the promise is peace, I have to learn to take a step back and say, you know what? I trust that even in the middle of the stress, even in the middle of the disappointment, whatever it may be that you're facing right now that's causing the stress in your life, you're standing in the middle of it, in the middle of conflict, but you're saying, I still trust that God is working it out for my highest good. I still trust, even though things don't look good right now, even though there's strain, even though there's heartache, even though there's all of these things, there's uncertainty in life, there's stress, there's all of these things, but I still trust that God is actively working it out for my highest good. Therefore, I have peace, not as the world leaves. It's not an empty peace. That's one thing, the word shalom. Whenever the Jewish people would say goodbye to each other, they would say shalom, which means peace be with you. But that was just a customary saying. That was like saying goodbye. That would be a saying goodbye. They would say shalom. And so whenever Jesus said, I leave you peace, he was saying, I'm not just saying goodbye. It's not just an empty meaning. When I'm saying peace, I'm leaving you peace, it means that I am actively giving you a gift of peace that you're going to carry with you and that you're going to be able to stand upon in the midst of the worst times of your life. So I believe for that we can be thankful, right? So to wrap this episode up, I just want to remind you that this busy, stress-filled culture, we don't have to participate in it. We really don't have to participate in this hamster wheel that happens in our day-to-day lives. We don't have to do that. So how do I get off the hamster wheel? I take responsibility for myself. I learn how to look at my life, the state it's in, and say, where do I need to take responsibility? Where do I need to take responsibility? So let's start with stress, because stress has so many horrible implications on your mind. We covered it today, on your mind, on your emotions, and on your body. Ultimately, you'll feel it in your body. You cannot have stress, chronic stress, ongoing stress in your life and not feel it in your body. You will feel it. And so we have to learn how to step back, take responsibility, say, okay, what do I need to do today? How can I change this today? And for some of you, it's going to look like breaking cycles, because stress can become comfortable, especially if it's imagined stress. We tend to, have you ever noticed that? We call it negative people, but honestly, it's just people who've become so accustomed to imagining the worst case scenario, imagining stress, imagining the bad happening, that they really have a hard time finding the good. They have a hard time believing that something good is going to happen instead of something bad. And so for some of you watching today, maybe that is you. Maybe that's something you deal with. And you're going to have to learn how to break the cycle of imagined stress, of imagined chaos in your life. And you're going to have to take responsibility and say, okay, today is the day where I'm no longer going to stay on that hamster wheel. I'm no longer going to continue on like it's normal, and I'm gonna do something about it today, because you are powerful and God has placed everything on the inside of you that you need. And we'll actually get into that later on in this series with the mind. But every morning you wake up, He is literally giving you this chemical in your brain that releases every single morning, that helps aid in the tearing down of negative thoughts. He has physically reinforced us. Our body will heal naturally if you give it the right things, if you put the right things on the inside of it. So He has given us everything we need, mentally, emotionally, physically, to thrive in life and not just survive. God's intention for your life is not just to survive every day, to wake up, go to work, come home, never feel happy, never feel joy, never live the life that God has called you to live. That's not living, and that's not the original design that God has for your life. And so my encouragement today is, let's begin to look at our life. Let's start with stress. Let's begin to narrow down these things, and let's begin to take responsibility for where we're at. And let's make a plan. So what can you do? Well, first thing in the morning, instead of scrolling through social media, instead of opening it up and seeing the news and what's happening in our world, let's get outside, get some morning sunlight, and sit down and just take a few minutes to meditate on the Word of God. Take a few minutes to just sit there and say, God, I'm thankful for this life you've given me. It may not always look good. It may not always be easy, but I'm thankful that I'm here. I'm thankful for the children you've given me. I'm thankful for the husband you've given me, the life that I'm living. God, I'm thankful. And begin your day with being thankful. There's so many things you can complain about, but the antidote to that is being thankful. So how about, instead of challenging yourself, say, you know what, I'm going to wake up in the morning. I'm not going to open social media. I'm going to instead go outside. I'm going to meditate, and I'm going to be thankful for my life, thankful for what God has done in me. And then as you go throughout your day, whenever these stressors arise, whenever you start feeling these feelings of stress, remember, tell yourself, I think, feel, choose. I'm having this emotion, so I need to go back to the thought that caused it. And take that thought and reframe. And so instead of imagining the worst, reframe and say, you know what? What if the best thing comes from this experience? What if this is for my betterment and not my detriment? What if great things are going to happen? What if we really just, it may sound silly, but what if we really start reframing our thoughts? And what you're going to do is you're going to begin to rewire your brain. You're going to begin to see through a different lens. You're going to change your perspective, and you're going to be able to deal with the stress of life much more easily. So thank you for joining me today. I really hope this helps someone out there. If you're watching, thank you for your time. If this did help you in any way, then maybe you want to share it on social media or share it, tag a friend maybe who needs to hear it. And I'm going to be doing several more episodes of these on the power of the mind. So I will be releasing them every single Monday. So stay tuned next Monday and we will continue the series. Have a good week.